to the Saints Insider Podcast. Today is Tuesday, April the 22nd. I'm Zach Ewing along with Koki Riley. He is our LSU baseball beat writer. Haven't talked baseball in a couple of weeks, Koki. We do have a small, sad, somber gymnastics note at the end. An untimely end for the LSU gymnastics team. But today will mostly be about baseball. And, since the last time we talked, things have not gone real well for the Tigers.
When did the Saints start playing baseball?
Did I say the Saints?
I think you did, yeah.
Did I really?
Yeah.
Okay. LSU Insider Podcast. I've got NFL draft on the mind, if you couldn't tell.
That's okay. We all do.
Yeah. The Saints would be bad at baseball, too. No, but LSU is not bad at baseball, but they also have not been maybe quite what they were the last time we talked a couple weeks ago.
A
slump.
They were coming off the road sweep over Oklahoma, and I guess it is like a relative slump to go 2-4 in conference play, but I guess we are now, a series victory after that bad series against Auburn has kind of put them more or less back on the relative right track, I should say. Not in a bad spot, but not in the greatest spot, but in a much better spot heading into this week against a Tennessee team that is coming off a series loss against Kentucky. So this is going to be a really, really fascinating series coming up. But let's talk about what's happened since the last time we did the show.
I actually think you've got three fascinating series. Actually, if you want to throw in South Carolina and Paul Maneri, you've got four fascinating series coming up to end the season.
Maybe fascinating for different reasons.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But we talked about this at the beginning of the year, that there was this crucial stretch coming in late April and May for LSU, and now it's here. And I don't know. I mean, okay, so 2-4, as you said, they won one series, lost one series. I think things look differently if they manage to win even one game at Auburn, because then you're not going to win every series. You go lose a tough SEC road series, come back home and win a series. Okay, everything's fine. So maybe we're splitting hairs here, but you hate to go 2-4. I don't know. The only thing that LSU has lost tangibly is probably a chance at the SEC regular season title.
Yeah,
it's not over. But they're 4 games behind Texas. They don't have the tiebreaker. There's only 12 games to go. I mean, it's going to be an uphill battle as far as that goes.
Texas has some tough games, but LSU has a lot of tough games as well. So that's just kind of life in the SEC when it comes to that. So even if Texas regresses a little bit here, which I'm expecting that to happen to some degree, I don't know. I saw that team play baseball for 3 games straight, and I just didn't feel like they were 4 games better than everybody else good in the SEC. But I guess crazier things have happened. But anyway,
sometimes teams run good, man. That's
yeah.
And sometimes teams run bad, which maybe is just what LSU hasn't gotten blown out in these games. They're losing for at least maybe there was the one game at Auburn that kind of got out of hand a little bit, but for the most part, they've been in these games. They're just not pulling them out like they were the few weeks before that. So my question for you is, are there red flags here that tell you, even if LSU hasn't lost much tangible, they're still number 7 in the country, still in line for a top 8 seed, which is everything they wanted, not having a bad season by any stretch, 34-7. Is there any red flag out there that makes you worry about this team come the postseason that has kind of reared its head these last couple of weeks?
Honestly, my view on this team really hasn't changed that much since the last time we talked, and part of it was the process in which they lost to Auburn. I thought it was one of the more unconcerning sweeps you could possibly have because of the fact that your offense played so poorly to a point where I don't really think that's the team and that's the offense. It was just like a really, really bad weekend at the plate. And you kind of saw that a little bit over this weekend as well, but not quite as much because you had the really good offensive performance in the first game. I thought they probably should have scored more runs in the second game. They left some stuff on the table, but they had really good process. They had really good at bats consistently in that game, even though they only scored 4 runs. And then the last game, they just weren't really executing with 2 strikes. And they were, falling behind in a lot of counts in the third game. But I thought in that Auburn series, it was a lot of poorly hit balls and early counts. It was just a lot of bad process that turned into bad results. And it was just so uncharacteristic to the point where I don't really think that's something to totally worry about moving forward as we go further and further into the season. And also, there were some good things that happened, even though they got swept, like the bullpen pitching really well, right? 1 earned run in 12 and 2/3 innings, which if you would have told me that heading into the series, I would have said they would have won the series, right? The starting pitching wasn't that good that weekend either, but it wasn't to the point where it would have lost you all those games. You know,
Right.
they pitched just well enough for you to be in all those games, and then your offense just wasn't able to pick them up. And you saw a difference this weekend, right? Where Kane Anderson struggles with the home runs, and we can get into that later. But at the same time, Anthony Ianson's great, and the bullpen has another, I'd say, solid weekend. Not a great weekend. Wasn't as good as they weren't as good as they were against Auburn, but they didn't take enough of a step back to where you're like, all right, we're back into these issues with most of these bullpen guys. I'd say overall, I have more confidence in this bullpen than I did maybe even after we talked to the Oklahoma series, because again, they only threw 2 relievers in that entire series.
Yeah.
And I think starting wise, maybe they've taken a step back. I think you could definitely say that. And then offensively, maybe half step back from where we thought they were in the Oklahoma series. But it was really tough to tell with the offense because of weather concerns, especially with the last game. So that's kind of where I am with this team right now overall.
I'm glad that you can be the voice of reason here, because I do think that there are fans, and I know you see them in your mentions and all these things of, oh my God, the sky is falling. We got swept by Auburn. This team is trash. They're going nowhere. Slow down. Like, I think the first 4 SEC series, LSU was 5-0 in games decided by 1 or 2 runs. You're not going to win all of those games. You're just not going to in baseball.
Yeah.
And so what happened was they got to Auburn and they lost a couple of those games.
And like there was an aspect of the Oklahoma series, if you wanted to look at it from a very big picture sense and a very practical sense, where that's just winning that way is just not sustainable. Like those 2-0, 4-3 sort of wins. If you're winning like that all the time, which is part of the reason why I think Texas is going to slow down at some point.
It's good to win like that, but you can't count on winning. As a Seattle Mariners fan, I can tell you, you cannot count on winning like that for a whole season. So like to a certain extent, there's just a little bit of regression that's baked into that. But let's talk about the offense a little bit, because I do think that if there is any red flag, that's it, is that LSU, even going back to the Oklahoma series, which was a sweep, that offense has not been producing quite like it was early in SEC play, certainly not in non-conference play, which is to be expected. But I started looking at these box scores, and LSU lost at Auburn 8-4, 4-2, 3-2. The game they lost to Alabama was 7-4 last Saturday, excuse me. So I started thinking, well, they keep scoring 2 and 3 and 4 runs in all of these losses, but if they get to 5, boy, they're hard to beat. And so I went back and added it up. LSU is 29-1 when they score at least 5 runs, and that includes 8-1 in the SEC. The only loss was the second game of the series at Texas, where the LSU had a lead. Bullpen was not good in that game. They lost 11-7.
Yeah, that was the bullpen ring alarm game. Yeah.
So look. Every team has a good record when they score 5 runs. That goes for any level. Well, maybe not any level of baseball, but certainly any level above college. Like 5 runs is going to win you a lot of games, but 29-1 is ridiculous. Now, on the flip side, when LSU doesn't score 5 runs, they are having trouble winning those 3-2 and 2-0 games. They're only 5-6 in those games,
which is about what you would expect. If you're scoring less than 5 runs, I'd say
you have trouble going 500.
And you have a pretty good pitching staff, which they do. They're 3rd in the SEC in ERA. They're tied for 1st in the conference in strikeouts, and tied for 1st with Tennessee, which is another reason why.
Yeah, we'll talk about that Tennessee pitching staff.
Yeah, so we'll get into depth in that series later, but to go in depth on the offense, I think there are definitely aspects of it that are pretty concerning, and I think there are definitely aspects of it where I'm not, I guess, terribly concerned. And I think if you go guy to guy, I think Derek Coryell's been really good. I think Danny Dickinson's been really good. I think Chris Stanfield's been exceptional. Like
He just keeps hitting, man.
He's been one of their best hitters in conference play this year. Came into this past weekend leading the team in OPS and batting average in SEC play. And he's your number 9 hitter. So kind of tells you that they still have pretty quality depth when it comes to their lineup. They don't have a lot of obvious holes at the plate, which is a good thing, which is something that not a lot of other teams have. But when you look at a guy like Jared Jones, for example, his numbers just aren't up to snuff right now in conference play. And this is a guy who had like a 950 OPS in conference play last season. You expected something around that this year, if not better. Right now, he was a little bit better this weekend. Hit the home run, hit the double.
And they need his power. They only had 1 home run in that series at Auburn. That was a big problem. Like,
yeah.
And how many they have at Oklahoma? I didn't go back and look, but it wasn't many.
They had 2 or 3.
All on that Friday game, I think. Yeah.
All in that middle game, yeah.
But like when you got a guy like Bear Jones in your lineup, you need him to hit to be the thumper. I mean, you need him to hit some of those.
Yeah, and they need him. And I think he's been destroying non-conference pitching. Like in these midweek games, he's almost guaranteed to hit a home run and have 3 or 4 hits. It's kind of crazy if you look at his. I'd like to look at his non-conference numbers only and split them out with his conference numbers.
I don't have non-conference, but I have overall. Okay, overall. Okay, sorry, this is conference. He's hitting 244 in conference and slugging 359. Okay, now let's go up to overall. He's hitting 360 overall and slugging 671. So he's doubled, and that includes the conference and non-conference. So he's doubled his. If you just parsed out non-conference, it'd be like slugging 800 and something.
Exactly, and I think to sort of like get this offense going a little bit and to spark some things, they've actually made some changes to the lineup. Derek Coryell isn't leading off every single day. He's still at the top of the order, but he's hitting first or second this time. Now this time. Daniel Dickinson's getting some spots at the leadoff spot. They're moving Ethan Fry up into the order a little bit. When he's starting, he's playing even more. Fry's been a pretty good hitter for them. And this weekend, 3 for 9 with a home run, which is not bad. And they've had a lot of not bad, but not great performances outside of the Auburn series where everyone was kind of not very good. Yeah. So I think that, offensively, it's not awful right now, but like I thought their process was a lot better in this Alabama series, and it should have turned into more runs. And it was the sort of process where I'm not that concerned about it moving forward. But at the same time, like you want to see more results from this offense, and like you said, like when they score more than 5 or more runs, they win these games. And because they had the pitching staff to sort of tamper down teams enough to where, you can win games with the sort of numbers that they put up. And part of it's a power thing. You want to see them hit more home runs. I mean, 2 3-run home runs was the difference in that first game this past weekend. So maybe play Jake Brown a little bit more. He had a really big weekend despite not even starting one of the games, not even playing in one of the games. So they have options to go to. Ashton Larson came up big, obviously in game 1 this past weekend. So they have a lot of decisions to make with playing time. It's kind of interesting to see how this lineup has sort of evolved throughout the year. Guys coming in and out a little bit, guys moving up and down a little bit. There have been some constants like Chris Stanfield and Derek Coryell and Danny Dickinson, but like look at a guy like Michael Braswell starting to play a little bit better offensively. Tanner Reeves is sort of fading into the background a little bit more. Jake Brown isn't playing every single day, but when he's in there, he's hitting. But they have trouble taking him out fully because Josh Pierce is doing just enough to stay in the lineup, and they don't want to take out his experience. And Ethan Fry is doing more to earn himself more playing time as kind of the everyday DH. He's hitting more against right-handed pitching, et cetera, et cetera. Stephen Milam's kind of struggling, but then he hits a 3-run home run, and he's the only guy who hit a home run against Auburn. So it's kind of confusing right now. It's hard to put your finger on one guy who's really struggling, except for maybe Jared Jones.
When you have this many options, right? You have, it's a good problem, but it's still a problem because if you're Jay Johnson, you've got to decide how to construct the lineup. You talked about some of the changes they've had to make. some of the decisions he has to make. And it feels a little bit like, and I'm going to go old school here, but if anybody remembers the opening scene of the movie Office Space, where Peter is like, he picks a lane and that lane immediately backs up and the other lane starts moving, and no matter what you do, you're picking the wrong lane. Like sometimes when you're in a slump, I have to imagine Jay Johnson feels like that, where he's like, I'm going to try this today. That didn't work. I should have done it the other way. Okay, I'm going to do it that way tomorrow. It didn't work. I should have stuck with what I had. You know what I mean? Like maybe that's a strained analogy, but it just feels like you're not quite hitting on what you need to. Whereas, when things are going well, it seems like you can do no wrong. And that's where I'll end with this offensive discussion, Koki, is like, we had the same discussion after the Omaha series. They struggled offensively against Omaha, the second weekend series of the year. They won a close game, I think 4-2, then lost the next day 5-4. Couldn't get to that magic number of 5 runs. And so, like, we sat and talked, is this a problem? Well, guess what? They were just fine. They went to Texas the next week and hit the tar off the ball. They're still drawing walks. That 3-2 loss to Auburn on that Sunday game, they had 7 walks and only 5 strikeouts. They're putting the ball in play. They're getting traffic. I think they're going to be fine.
Yeah, I would say so. And the problem lately, I think, has been overall is like enough guys are doing well enough to where it's not obvious that they're really, really struggling and that's like a big dead hole in the lineup. But what they can't really do right now, or they're having trouble doing, at least at times, is, base hit, walk, and then a base hit, and then another base hit opens the floodgates. Like they are having trouble stringing together enough quality at bats to where they can really take advantage of their depth, right? Because usually it's bingo, then not bingo. It's they're not, or it's like 2 guys get on and someone grounds into a double play, or 2 guys get on but there's 2 outs, so it puts too much pressure on the next guy to get a hit. And you're kind of seeing that happened a little bit this past weekend. And it happened a lot the weekend before.
The sequencing is all off, and that's not
a little bit. Yeah.
That's not really anything you can control. All you can control is your at bat, hit the ball hard,
exactly.
Try to get on
and
base.
And they did a better job of that.
And
again, like they did a better job of that this weekend than they did last weekend, where they did not do a good job of that at all, and they were swinging too early in counts and hitting bad fly balls and all this stuff. The bad process, right? This weekend was better process. Last weekend was worse process, and the process is what matters the most, in my opinion, when it comes to this stuff.
And we know Jay Johnson can coach hitting. So I wouldn't press the panic button, although, as we'll talk about at the end of the show, like things aren't going to get any easier.
Yes.
So let's take a quick break, and we'll be back in 30 seconds. We have a few pitching staff things to talk about, and then we'll get to the Volunteers right after this.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. With quick picks, you can tap right into pre-built, ready-to-bet parlays right from the home screen. And if you miss tip-off, no worries. You can play same-game parlays live during the action. Plus, it's never been easier to find and bet on the biggest matchups of the day, so you can keep up with all the action. Caesars Sportsbook, proud partner of the NBA and the only sportsbook app with Caesars Rewards. Download it today.
Welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider. I'm Zach Ewing, along with Koki Riley. We invite you to subscribe to our LSU Tigers at NOLA.com YouTube channel. Full coverage of the baseball team as it wraps up its regular season over the next 4 weeks and then into the postseason, into the drama-filled part of the year. We're also going to have a lot more football talk coming up. We will end this show with a little bit of gymnastics talk. We cover all the sports here. But I think it's going to be baseball, football. Maybe we'll sprinkle in some softball here and there over the next few months. All right, Koki, we talked about this LSU baseball team's offense sputtering just a little bit, but maybe not a huge cause for concern. Let's get to the pitching staff, and I want to start at the top with Cade Anderson, because as great as he was the last time we talked, that fantastic outing against Oklahoma, I got to pat us on the back. We had a little bit of a word of warning that when you throw that many pitches, sometimes your gas tank can take a little bit of time to refill. And frankly, I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's what he's looked like the last couple weeks. He's gotten through 4 or 5 innings and then kind of had that rough inning he couldn't get out of against both Auburn and Alabama.
I don't know if it's necessarily the 135 pitch outing that's creating this, or more of the fact that he's leaving too many pitches over the heart of the plate, and he's a guy who throws so many strikes that sometimes you can throw too many strikes, right? When you throw so many strikes and you're going to leave a couple balls over the heart of the plate, and teams aren't going to be threatened by the possibility of having to chase after something. And when that happens, sometimes you don't have like the most elite stuff, right? He has very good stuff, but he doesn't have like the Liam Doyle 98 mile per hour like ghost fastball, right? For example. And when you kind of have all the combination of those things with the warmer weather and the smaller ballpark at the box this weekend, like this weekend was like this past weekend was kind of the perfect example of all the things that can go wrong and can turn into a home run fest.
And compare that to the Oklahoma outing. To your point, where the wind's blowing in and it's freezing cold.
It's cold.
And even if you're as long as you're throwing strikes, they ain't hitting them anywhere. I mean,
yeah. And the thing is, he's getting a lot of strikeouts, right? He's getting a ton of strikeouts still. And there was a 2-3 inning stretch where I was like, oh, it's Kane Anderson, he's fine, right? And then in the 5th inning, it all went sour, not necessarily because he had lost it felt like, or guys were getting a bunch of singles or stringing together big innings. It was the home runs, right? The home runs have been the issue. When he's giving up runs, he's giving up homers, and that's because he's throwing a lot of strikes. He's leaving balls over the plate a little bit too much. And how do you solve that is like a more of a short-term issue than a long-term issue, because in the long term, you're playing the SEC tournament, which is a big park. It's hard to hit home runs there. So that's going to play into his advantage if he gets the throw there. And assuming he does. And then if they get to Omaha,
same thing.
That's the perfect park for him. And like Ty Floyd kind of ran into this issue a little bit 2 years ago. And then he pitched very well in those two parks just as a previous historical example. And now it's because of a specific style thing and less than he throws a lot of strikes thing. So I'm not terribly alarmed I still think he's a great pitcher. I'm not terribly alarmed by this. If you're not shooting yourself in the foot with the walks, if you're not giving up tons of singles, and doesn't seem like guys are seeing the ball great off against him, because guys still aren't seeing the ball that great, because look at the strikeout totals week in and week out. They're still swinging and missing. They're still striking out looking. It's just a matter of keeping the ball out of the heart of the plate and throwing enough balls to the point where you're not leaving balls over the plate in early in counts, right?
Big picture,
it's hard, you know?
Yeah, no, you're right. And it's, again, you're the voice of reason here, so we appreciate that. He's 9 strikeouts away from 100 for the season. He's only thrown 57 innings, so he is striking out a ton of guys. Long term, he's already more than doubled his innings from last year because of the injury. I don't know what his career high was in high school or anything, but at some point this year, he's probably hitting his career high in innings. Coming off of the injury, do you see any reason to worry long term for him that he's going to be able to maintain this level into May and June?
I think the 135 pitch thing is less of a how is he going to perform this year thing, and for me at least, and more of a how much of a tax are you putting this on his pro career when he gets picked in the first round this year, which I would put. I mean, to be honest, I would be very surprised if he's not a first-round pick. Just based on the people who I talk to who know this sort of thing more than I do, they say that he deserves to be a first-round pick.
You're a lefty with good stuff, man. Somebody's going to pick you.
I mean, the art. If you look at mock drafts and articles and all that sort of stuff, they think he's a first-round pick. So the guy is very, very talented, and he has a pretty high floor because of the fact that he's really good feel for all of his pitches. They're all, if not at least average, average to plus with all 4 pitches, and he can throw them all for strikes, and he's left-handed. So you combine all that stuff, it really, really raises his floor as a prospect. So and for all those reasons, that's why he gets a lot of strikeouts, even in the SEC. So I'm really fascinated to see him against Liam Doyle this weekend. That's going to be a very, very fun matchup. And yeah, like the home runs are a concerning thing. It's going to be a very concerning thing this weekend in particular when you're facing a Tennessee team that loves to hit the ball out of the park, right?
Yeah.
He's got to be really, really careful this weekend.
Real quick before we get to Tennessee, the number 3 starter, the Sunday starter, Jay Johnson threw us a curveball on Saturday. He starts Connor Ware instead of Chase Shores. Connor Ware pitches into the 3rd inning. He was fine. But then Chase Shores comes in and was not all that effective in relief. Of course, he inherited some traffic, and LSU ends up losing the game. What was the reason behind that, and do you think that's a permanent switch?
I'm not 100% confident that that's a permanent switch because, Alabama was running out a pretty lefty-heavy lineup.
Okay.
They kind of have a pretty heavy lefty lineup. Will Hodo, Kate Snell, two of their better hitters, left-handed. Their leadoff guy, Bryce Fowler's left-handed. So I feel like that was in part, Brady Neal is another lefty. I think they had 5 lefties starting in that last game. So that's part of the reason why they went to Connor Ware in that spot, in my opinion. But I think this point still stands with Chase Shores that he's really struggling. Like, guys are seeing the ball well off of him. There's a difference between giving up 4 or 5 runs with Chase Shores and giving up 4 or 5 runs if you're Kate Anderson. Kate Anderson's still getting a ton of strikeouts, and he's forcing teams to do it the hard way, which is hitting home runs, right? And with Shores, it's guys are seeing the ball well off of him. He's walking too many guys. He's hitting a guy here or there. He's not making it easy for himself, and teams are seeing the ball well off of him, and that's a concern. And it seems confusing because the guy still throws 97, but they're just seeing it well because he doesn't have fantastic deception with his delivery. He's not a guy who necessarily has that out pitch right now. He can get to 2 strikes, but he has trouble putting the guy away. And I don't know if that means taking another step forward with his slider, whether it's throwing that pitch more often, whether it's maybe throwing a sinker more and trying to get more ground ball outs. But they have to figure out something because right now, whatever they're doing is just not working.
Do you think, and there's 3 midweek games left starting tonight with Northwestern State, but is William Schmidt a possible option for that 3rd spot going forward, maybe after that?
Right now, I don't think so because he's been struggling quite a bit too. He had a pretty good start against Nickel State, but they put him into an SC game again this past weekend, and he was okay for two batters, forces a ground out and a fly out, and then he walks the leadoff 2 hitters in the 9th inning, and that turns into another 2-run inning for them because there's
and
more
big,
traffic
big
in the
2
bases.
runs.
And those big 2 runs that kind of end the possibility of a 9th inning comeback. So I think Connor Ware is probably the guy, as you saw. As long as Connor Ware can relatively throw it around the strike zone, he can be an effective pitcher for them because he has the repertoire to be a starter and to get through, 1 or 2 times through the order. It's just a matter of can he throw enough strikes because he has that high right fastball and he's just got to keep it in the zone close enough to the zone to make guys to swing at the pitch, right? Because if he's not throwing it near the zone, guys aren't threatened by that pitch, and they can kind of sit on breaking balls or just walk, right? And that's kind of the thing that he needs to sort of navigate through. And he did a decent job of that this weekend, I thought. And scoreless first 2 innings to sort of get LSU on the right track. The problem is the offense couldn't really take advantage of that, and Chase Shores comes to the game. And then all of a sudden they're trailing, and then the snowball effect sort of happens after that. Even though, again, the bullpen after him, right after Shores, was actually really good until the 9th inning. So something to sort of keep an eye out for as we head into this weekend.
Okay. Speaking of this weekend, let's dig into Tennessee for a minute. 6:30 Friday night, 7 o'clock Saturday night, and then 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon. It's not just this series, and this is the one we'll focus on the most, but this again kicks off this 3-weekend stretch that is going to be very challenging for LSU, and I think could either cement their spot as a top 8 seed or maybe keep them on the bubble or drop them below the bubble going into the SEC tournament. We'll see what happens because these are the teams that at least 2 of them, that you're competing against for those spots. So it's Tennessee this weekend. It's at Texas A&M next weekend, which is not going to be a top 8 seed, but boy, are they playing better. I mean, we talked about that. Preseason number 1, huge struggles. They were 1-9 in SEC play. Now all of a sudden they're 8-10, and they have run that 7-1 stretch off partially against Tennessee and Arkansas. I mean, they beat Tennessee the last 2 in that series.
Most of it, yeah.
Took a series against Arkansas. I mean, they're playing as well as anybody right now, even though they're further down in the standings. And then you come back home in a couple of weeks and play Arkansas. So this 9-game stretch and there's a couple of midweek games mixed in, but this 9-game SEC stretch is huge for this. I mean, it will define this regular season.
It'll define whether they're a host or a top 8 seed host. I think it kind of comes down to that, because I mean,
the floor is probably like that 14-15 range.
Barring a disaster, like they're gonna host a regional. Like I would be really, really surprised if they drop into a two spot. Like they would have to get swept a couple times, and maybe even struggle against South Carolina on the last weekend. Like it would be, because they're already at 12 wins in conference play, and they really only need to get to 15 or 16.
They're going to get to 40 wins without a sweat,
and they're going to get to 40 wins without a sweat. Like it's just a matter of, can they be a top 8 seed? And right now they're projected to be that. I want to say they're 6th in RPI, 9th in KPI. That's kind of around. That's right around the range where you want to be. When you're heading into, when you're talking about being that top 8 seed, which is huge, because LSU has never won a super regional on the road. In the history of this program, they have never won a super regional on the road to get to Omaha. They've always won it at home. So if you want to get in that situation, you want to be a top 8 seed. So in order to do that, they got to win at least one of these 2 weekends between this weekend and the Arkansas weekend, and they kind of need to win that Texas A&M weekend, even if it's on the road. And if they don't win that weekend, you kind of need to win both the Tennessee and the Arkansas weekends. And that's going to be really tough, because they're 2 really good teams. For a while, it looked like Tennessee was unbeatable, right? Like they went 20 games straight or something. What was it, 20, 21? I forget exactly what it was.
Well, and like Arkansas did for a while too, and now Texas A&M does. So and LSU did for a little while. I mean, all these are good teams, so when they get hot, they're difficult to beat. I am looking at some national statistics here for Tennessee.
Yeah, I got it down here if you wanted to.
Well, I was just going to highlight 2, and these are sort of the flex stats of baseball. They are number 1 in the country in strikeouts, and they are number 1 in strikeouts per 9 is what I'm looking at. 12.2 strikeouts per 9, and they are number 4 in the country in ERA, and they are number 2 in the country in hitting home runs. So what they do is they don't let you hit the ball, and they hit the ball a long way. Yeah,
absolutely. But also, like if you want to talk about teams that have struggled a little bit lately, they've lost their last 2 home series. They nearly lost that series, the series in between, on the road to Ole Miss. No one thought they really struggled hitting the ball at the end of this past weekend series against Kentucky, which is a team that we didn't really fear was a real contender to host even. So just something to sort of keep an eye out for. They've had some struggles on the mound. Maybe not when it comes to later in the week. Doesn't seem like they have quite the pitching depth when it comes to SEC play. Their schedule has been a little bit weaker than it perceived, I guess, in a way, which kind of inflated the numbers maybe a little bit. Liam Doyle, their Friday guy, all that said, Liam Doyle, the Friday guy, has been the best pitcher in the country. Like, this is going to be a massive challenge for LSU's bats, as much of a challenge as you could possibly ask for. And then in the middle game, Marcus Phillips has been really great for them, but he has one major weakness, that is giving up stolen bases. And it's bad enough to the point where he's given up 30 steals in 48 2/3 innings. Wow. 2 weekends ago against Ole Miss, he gave up 7 steals in 3 1/3. And Ole Miss is not a team that runs around a whole ton. They're not quite like Kentucky.
And neither is LSU, but
yeah,
I think we might see it.
39% of the steal attempts against Tennessee have come against Phillips. Which is absurd, right? And that could be something that they could pick on. They did that a little bit this weekend against Alabama, where they sort of picked on Brady Neal a little bit, the former Tiger catcher who was at Alabama, who's now at Alabama. They stole 4 bases in the first 2 games, but 7 steals in 3 1/3 innings. That is an absurd number. So I think that's something to sort of definitely keep an eye out for in the middle game on Saturday. And then on Sunday, they've started a freshman, Tegan Coons, but he's gone really short in these games. So
almost an opener.
Yeah, it's more or less of an opener. So you're looking at kind of bullpen day after that. But as you mentioned, though, this team strikes out everybody. This is the first team that LSU's faced this year that's better at striking out guys than LSU is even. And LSU is elite at that. When it comes to their pitching staff. And the wild thing about all these strikeouts is that they don't walk anybody. Let me double check the stat, but yeah, they are They're third in the SEC in walks, in fewest walks.
No, number one in the country with a bullet in strikeout to walk ratio, 3.88. No one else is even within a tenth of Arkansas's next at 3.74.
Yeah.
So
This is an elite staff. This is the best pitching staff they have faced all year.
Which is something LSU's really good at. We mentioned, they walk a lot, they don't strike out a ton. It's going to be an interesting matchup, and I think, we talk about the challenge. It's also a big opportunity for a statement for LSU to say, hey, yeah, we slumped the last couple weekends. You win a series against Tennessee, things are going to look just right all over again.
And I think if they can keep the ball in the ballpark, these could actually potentially be low-scoring games, like believe it or not, which is kind of weird when you look at some of the names in these two lineups, the potential conditions this weekend with the warmer weather. But when you got a guy like Liam Doyle on the mound, and you got a guy like Kate Anderson on the mound, and the way that Anthony Ianson has pitched in the last few weeks, and just the way Marcus Phillips pitches, even though he gives up a ton of stolen bases, I agree. Two bullpens who have pitched pretty well. A guy like Zach Ewing, Casey Evans, two of the best relievers in the country. And if you look at Tennessee's lineup, the numbers are very daunting when you look at a guy like Gavin Keelan, who's probably been the best hitter in the country, maybe in at least the conference.
I thought you were going to say the continent, which is probably true too.
Maybe that too. But their lineup has struggled at the end of these last 2 weeks. So I'm really curious to see how if LSU can keep the ball in the park, I think they can get some zeros this weekend as well.
Well, I'm going to tell you the key is to get to 5 runs. Just score five runs. That's a magic number. So if you can do that, you might be in good shape,
especially early in the series. Yeah.
All right. Before we let you go, I did want to just mention LSU gymnastics. Disappointing weekend in Fort Worth, Texas, at the Nationals. I mean, look, it's hard, especially a sport that has that little margin for error like gymnastics. LSU just nothing disastrous. They just weren't quite on point in the semifinal Thursday. They finished behind UCLA and Utah, so they did not advance to Saturday's finals, did not get the final showdown with Oklahoma. Oklahoma goes on to win the national championship. So disappointing end for the ladies of LSU gymnastics. But as our producer Robert pointed out, Livy Dunn is signing autographs at Rouse's this week, so you can still get your LSU gymnastics fix. And
so free advertising.
By the way, Scott Rabelais is down at the Zurich Classic this week. So he wasn't able to join us, but he did pass along that he has been told Haley Bryant is a very strong candidate to join the LSU coaching staff next year. So she's not going anywhere. Kaylin Chio's not going anywhere. Connor McLean's not going anywhere. They're going to have a good team. So we'll talk some gymnastics too, but did want to kind of wrap a bow on that season. LSU, I think, technically 5th in the country. They had the highest score of any team that didn't advance to the Final Four, so they finished 5th. But all eyes on baseball this weekend. Out at the box, Tennessee at LSU, 6:30 Friday, 7 o'clock Saturday, 2 o'clock Sunday. You can check out Koki's coverage in The Advocate or at theadvocate.com/LSU. And we will be back to talk about it and maybe preview a little series out in College Station that looks a lot more interesting, Koki.
Yeah, that'll, again, will be fascinating, especially on the road. So looking forward to it.
All right. That's our show for today. Thank you for watching the LSU Sports Insider. Our producer was Robert Young. He's Koki Riley. I'm Zach Ewing. Thank you for watching.